Next, the Senate Education Committee hears testimony from William Kirwan, the Chancellor and CEO of the University of Maryland. He was joined at this hearing with other higher ed officials from New Hampshire and North Carolina to talk about the reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, which is set to expire at year's end. Senator Tom Harkin chairs the committee, and Senator Lamar Alexander serves as ranking member.
Education, Labor, and Pensions will come to order. Today's hearing is the second in our series to examine critical issues in post-secondary education as we look to reauthorize the Higher Education Act next year. The topic we'll discuss today is of great interest to policymakers and the public, and that is innovation in higher education. We've spent time previously in this committee discussing the role of innovation, but much of that was focused just on college affordability. While that is, of course, of paramount importance, and will probably be discussed again here today, we'd like to spend this hearing examining an equally important and related subject, the landscape of innovations in higher education that increase student learning, engagement, and degree completion. If our nation is going to educate more students and by the year 2020 reclaim its status of having the highest proportion of college graduates in the world, we need to do more to ensure that students are persisting towards and attaining quality degrees. So the key question is, what can colleges and universities do to maximize learning and supports to ensure students are getting through on time or faster and earning a meaningful credential? Today's panel explores efforts in progress at the institution and system-wide level, both high and low tech, to increase student success in higher education. These innovations can inform our committee's work in designing federal policy and determine the role the federal government can play in promoting effective change to help America regain and retain its global leadership. Too often, good innovation can be siloed, either within an individual classroom, college, or system. So a key focus of today's conversation will be to discuss what we can do to allow proven innovations to be replicated or scaled up. Our panel of experts will walk us through the impetus for the changes they've developed and the impact that these innovations are having on their students' learning experience and success in completing a degree. As I said at the start of this series of hearings focusing on reauthorization of the Higher Education Act, this is no time to be complacent with the status quo. Everything is okay is not acceptable to this committee. The stakes are too high. So we'll need to take a tough look at reimagining how our higher education system can work better. But I'd also caution we should not waste time entertaining innovation just for the sake of innovation. We want to know what that innovation is doing to make sure that students are getting the most out of their college experience. The makeup of this panel, I think, is indicative of the very broad scope of our higher education system and how that system needs to continue to innovate to meet the disparate needs of all the students they serve at whatever point those students enter our higher education system. We all understand that a one-size-fits-all approach simply will not do. We're witnessing the emergence of many new, innovative models. And this is a great strength of America's system. While I am proud that we have such a diverse system, we must ensure that all current and future models are rigorously focused on student success and degree attainment. Again, I look forward to working with my ranking member and all members of this committee on both sides to get a good higher education bill. And one of the main parts of it is what we can do to further promote, stimulate, as I said, expand, scale up innovations that have proven to be effective in different areas. So with that, I invite Senator Alexander for his opening statement.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, and thanks for this second in the series of hearings on the higher education reauthorization. I'm really looking forward to this. This is a distinguished panel of people who know what they're talking about, and so that ought to inform us in terms of what we should be doing and what we ought not to be doing. There was a lot of talk in our last hearing about where's the innovation in higher education. And in thinking about that, it occurs to me that innovation for its own sake is not what we're after. As the chairman said, I think the goal of innovation in higher education is to, number one, improve student performance, Number 2, increase retention and graduation rates. And number 3, do it in a way that reduces or maintains costs and encourages efficiency that benefits taxpayers and students. So 2 things come to mind about this approach that I'll be looking for. You would think we have the perfect environment to encourage innovation in higher education, unlike many other countries in the world. I mean, in America, we think the American way is to have a marketplace and an entrepreneurial spirit. We don't have a state church. We have lots of churches. Our music springs up from various places. And that's the case with our colleges and universities. 6,000 different colleges and universities of many different types, from Yeshiva to Nashville's Otto Diesel College to Harvard to the University of Maryland. I mean, these are all different places, and we honor the autonomy of each institution. They really operate in a marketplace where students have a chance to choose them, and they compete for students and scholars. So that environment ought to produce the largest amount of innovation. I think it's important to be reminded that innovation doesn't always work. I used to be involved with venture capital and helped to start a business that made its way from scratch to the stock exchange, and I learned along the way that most new businesses don't succeed, and most new ideas don't work. For example, in the 1980s when I was governor, and we'll hear from Mr. Hall about this, we were worried about the number of students who were in colleges and universities who weren't prepared for that. We thought that was wrong, so we said the way to deal with that was to say to them, you can come to the college or the community college, but you won't get credit for a course if you're not prepared for college. We're very proud of ourselves for that innovation. Well, it turns out 20 years later that probably isn't the right thing to do, and what we'll hear from Mr. Hall and what our state is now doing is abandoning that approach and admitting more people and working harder to move them through the system faster. That seems to be working a lot better. So what seems to be a good innovation at one point might not be later, and it's a caution to us that we should be careful about coming up with even a very good sounding idea here and expecting that it will work 10 years from now, or imposing it on all 6,000 institutions around the country. A second concern I have, though, is that one would think that at a time when the world is changing so rapidly, and we have this marketplace of 6,000 institutions, that we'd be seeing more innovation, that we'd be seeing more. Now, maybe you'll tell us that it's there, but we just don't see it. But there's some obvious things that perhaps we should do to correct that. One may be that the federal government's in the way. For example, with too many rules and regulations that consume time. I talked with Dr. Kerwin for a minute, and Senator Mikulski and I have talked many times about deregulation of higher education and creating more of an environment in which innovation can occur. There are also the definition of a credit hour, not having the Pell Grant available year-round, federal aid rules that don't allow students to accelerate through coursework. I'd like to hear your comments about that and whether these are impediments, or there are other impediments that we in the federal government have erected that make it more difficult for you to innovate. The one area that seems to me that would be obvious for more innovation, and I think I understand a lot about why it hasn't happened, but it seems to me it has to happen, is a more efficient use of time and facilities at colleges and universities. George Washington University's former president, Stephen Trachtenberg, once told me this. He said you could run 2 complete colleges with 2 complete faculties in the facilities now used half the year for 1. That's without cutting the length of students' vacations, increasing class sizes, or requiring faculty to teach more. He also pointed out that Dartmouth College has 1 mandatory summer session for every student in 4 years, and his estimate was that would improve Dr. Trachtenberg's institution by 10 to 15, its bottom line, by $10 to $15 million a year. Those were his ideas, yet he never did that at George Washington University. So I understand some of the reasons for that, but maybe we need more of a culture of innovation. So what I'm looking for today is how do we encourage a culture of innovation at our 6,000 institutions without throwing a big wet blanket over that smothers you by giving you an order from Washington that might work at Austin Peay but not work at the University of Maryland, that might be good at Yeshiva but not at Harvard. How do we do that? How do we get out of the way? I look forward very much to this, and I thank the chairman for the hearing and for these excellent witnesses.
Thank you very much, Senator Alexander. I listened very carefully to your opening remarks, and I thought I heard you say that music can spring from someplace other than Nashville, Tennessee?
Actually, the Everly Brothers grew up in
Iowa, that's right. But they made their mark in Nashville.
They moved to Knoxville and then in Nashville, that's right.
That's right, exactly.
Shenandoah, right?
Shenandoah, Iowa. Very good.
Yeah, I studied Iowa.
He's one of the few people that's been to every county in Iowa more than once.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much.
Most of the Senate has, I think.
Right. That's true. Well, listen, we have a great panel, and I'm going to call on various senators for purposes of introduction. We'll start with Senator Warren for purposes of introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'm pleased to introduce Richard Kazis, who is Senior Vice President of Jobs for the Future in Boston, Massachusetts, which is home of the World Series champions, the Boston Red Sox. I just want to be sure we got that in. Mr. Kazis leads the policy and advocacy efforts at Jobs for the Future, an organization that is dedicated to improving educational and economic opportunities for low-income Americans. His work at JFF focuses on policies that would improve outcomes for low-income community college students, promote college and career readiness for struggling students, expand the effective high school models, and foster better school-to-career transitions. Mr. Kazis' dedication to expanding opportunity is making a real difference for students in Massachusetts and across the country. So I say welcome to Mr. Kazis. Thank you for taking the time to share your expertise. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Warren. And now I'll invite Senator Mikulski for purposes of an introduction.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's with great pleasure that I introduce to the committee Dr. Brett Kirwan, who is the Chancellor of the University of Maryland system. Dr. Kirwan has a distinguished career in higher education, himself actually being a faculty member in the classroom trying to educate students, and was a faculty member for over 20 years. He served as the president of College Park, the flagship university at the University of Maryland system, and for the last 11 years he's been Chancellor of the university system. Now that means he's essentially, and don't tell Governor O'Malley this, but he's like the governor of University of Maryland. He has 13 undergraduate schools, and primarily undergraduate, though they have higher education tracks, and then the professional schools downtown, medicine, law, nursing, social work, and pharmacy. During that time, he has faced all the big challenges that higher ed faces: rising tuitions, a changing demography of what the profile of a student body, some students coming ready to get their degrees in 3 years, and some coming not prepared at all to even start their first year. He faced declining state aid, rising cost, and increased change. He established something called the Effective and Efficiency Initiative, in which he brought new ideas to the school and brought along the Faculty Senate. Now, Senator Alexander, you know sometimes faculty senates, because you were president of Vanderbilt, are very difficult. Elizabeth Warren and I taught in higher ed, so we know what it's like to be a faculty senate and our senate. At least we have rules of engagement. So you had to really bring along a lot of people. So when we talk about innovation, we have to remember that every great leader has a board of regents, a state legislative body, and an internal governing body like a faculty senate. So he was able to then, through his ideas, to come up with lifting the faculty to take on more courses, getting students to take online credits, and do many other things, including transfer from community colleges. His goal was get more people in, but also make sure more people graduate. And we'll learn a lot from listening to him.
Thank you very much, Senator Mikulski. And now I'll turn both first Senator Hagan and Senator Burr for purposes of introduction. Senator Hagan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It is my honor and pleasure today with Senator Burr to introduce Dr. Scott Rawls, president of the North Carolina Community College System, which comprises 58 community colleges across North Carolina, population about 9.5 million people. And it's about a 30-minute drive to one of our community colleges from just about any place within the state. And the system has about 800,000 students. So Dr. Rawls truly understands the needs of our students and the importance of a cohesive community college system. In 2009, Dr. Rawls began an initiative within the system called the Success NC, with the ultimate goal of fostering student success and completion of the program. Success NC is about more than registering students for classes. It's about helping each student who walks through the door at our community college reach their educational and career goals. Students can earn multiple nationally recognized industry credentials while working towards an associate degree. We've got a successful model in North Carolina, and it has received a lot of much well-deserved national attention. Dr. Rawls has helped make our system one of the best in the nation. Employers, when I talk to them in the state, they tell me all the time they come to North Carolina because of our strong community college system and the work ethic of our employees and our workers. And I can proudly say that many of our community colleges in North Carolina have really been working diligently over the past 4 years to ensure that the schools and the faculty are doing everything possible to better prepare students for success in the workforce. A couple of examples. Guilford Tech is working with several companies right now in the aircraft maintenance business, Timco and Honda Jet, training employees to work in their companies. Central Carolina Community College in Sanford partners with local companies Coty and Caterpillar to prepare students for those jobs. Recently, I visited Cape Fear Community College. There was a woman, Teresa Handy. She was unemployed. She'd been laid off from a pharmaceutical company where she'd worked for 21 years. And she was wondering, what can I do next? She took classes at Cape Fear that had been partnered with GE Aviation in programs. She has now got a great job at GE Aviation. And I believe these kinds of partnerships between employers and our community colleges are exactly what we need to get our economy back on track, look at innovation. What is it that the 21st century job skills are, and how these community colleges and educational systems can really make a big difference in that area. So Dr. Rawls and many of our community college presidents throughout North Carolina are discussing a bipartisan legislation called the America Works Act that I've introduced with many others. So we look forward to continuing this partnership and finding these innovative ways to forge these relationships to better prepare our students for success. Dr. Rawls, we certainly welcome you to the committee, and we look forward to hearing all of your testimony.
Thank you, Senator Hagan. Senator Burr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me take this opportunity to welcome all the witnesses today. This is the start of a very important process as we talk about reauthorizing, and I am delighted to have Scott Rawls here, the 7th president of the North Carolina Community College System, a system that is over 50 years old. And when you're an individual that comes in to change a system, to make it innovative, you can imagine after 50 years exactly how many challenges he has run into. Scott is unique in many ways, but let me say that his rare skill is that of being an expert on both post-secondary education and the workforce system. And I'm not sure there's a combination that's needed more within the community college structure than that, and I might suggest it's not limited to the community college anymore. It's to all post-secondary education. I think that since taking over the helm of those 58 community colleges, Scott's led a course redesign so that students are taking relevant courses that prepare them for employment, but also engage them in ways that promote completion. What a novel approach, but it's something that we all have to take at heart. He's also made, in my view, the critical connection that the community college system and the K-12 system cannot be siloed. an early understanding that has led to the dual enrollment and early college high school opportunities in our state. Indeed. Dr. Rawls was talking about these opportunities long before they were fashionable in federal education debates. So I hope today that my colleagues will have an opportunity, not just from all the witnesses, but particularly from Scott Rawls. He is where the rubber meets the road. He's got the students that we need as a productive part of a vibrant economy, and they are a crucial part to this economy becoming vibrant. 21st century jobs look a lot different than 20th century jobs. 21st century students must look much different than 20th century students. I recognize that. More importantly, he recognizes that, and I thank him for being here today. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you both. Did I hear that they're making the Honda Jet in North Carolina?
We are the state of first flight. I know you might claim that for Iowa, but
listen, I know that. But is the Honda Jets being made there?
It is the first new private jet in 30 years.
It's a fantastic concept. Can you get me a ride in one?
I can get you. I can get you a jet if the price.
I want to sit in there. I want to sit in the right seat of that one. Anyway, and now I'll turn to Senator Alexander.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I would say to Senator Mikulski that I'm proud to have been a graduate of Vanderbilt, but I'm proud to have been president of the University of Tennessee, and it's important that I make that distinction when I go home. And so far as the Faculty Senate, I once asked a former university president what was the best thing about the job, and he said, the faculty as individuals. I said, what was the worst thing? He said, faculty as a whole. And you may remember that Dwight David Eisenhower, after he won World War II, went to be president of Columbia University, which we never hear about very much. And the reason we don't is because the first day he was on the job, he said, on the first day on any new job, I like to assemble the people under my command. And he had the faculty in, and he was gone in about a year. So I admire university presidents very much. It's a challenging job. One of the best is Tim Hall. He came from Ole Miss to make Austin Peay University in Tennessee the fastest growing university in our state, enrolling almost 11,000 students last year. The number of degrees has gone up 27%, undergraduate enrollment 16%. But the more important thing for today's hearing, as a result of Tennessee's outcome-based formula, Austin Peay is the #1 public university in Tennessee in terms of increased funding. That means they've done the best job of graduating students more rapidly, learning what they're supposed to learn in their undergraduate experience. So I look forward to hearing from him about those innovations, and we're proud of the work that he does there in Clarksville.
Thanks, Senator Alexander. And since we don't have a senator from New Hampshire, I will take the privilege of introducing Dr. Paul LeBlanc, because Iowa and New Hampshire have a very interesting symbiotic relationship.
I've been there, too, if you'd like for me to introduce you.
Believe me, it transcends party lines and everything else. But Dr. LeBlanc is president of Southern New Hampshire University. Over the past 9 years, under his leadership, Southern New Hampshire University has become the largest provider of online higher education in New England, and the first to have a full competency-based degree program approved by a regional accreditor and the U.S. Department of Education. Prior to his current position, Dr. LeBlanc directed a technology startup for Houghton Mifflin Publishing Company and served as president of Marlborough College in Vermont. He was the first person in his family to attend college and received his bachelor's from Framingham State University, his master's degree from Boston College, and his PhD from the University of Massachusetts. We welcome you all here. Very distinguished panel, indeed. All of your statements were made a part of the record in their entirety. We'll start with Mr. Kazis and move down the line. And if I could ask you all to sort of sum up, and I've read your testimonies yesterday. The summaries were very good. If you could sort of sum up in 5 to 7 minutes the major points you wish to make and then we'd like to engage in a conversation with you. So again, welcome, please, and proceed, Mr. Casas.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for inviting me here today. I commend you on taking on this critical issue of innovation in higher education, and I'm thrilled to be here for two reasons. One, because it's such a terrific panel, but also because it was a long night in Boston last night, and I was nervous that I wasn't going to make my plane this morning. This morning, I want to briefly characterize certain trends in higher education innovation to improve student success, particularly for low-income, first-generation, and non-traditional students who are the fastest-growing segment of college-goers and whose success is critical to national competitiveness. I'll then suggest some actions Congress can take to promote some of these promising trends. As you know, higher education is in a period of great ferment driven by rising student costs, state budget constraints, the explosion of new technologies, and better data on student outcomes in college and in the labor market. These forces create pressures on higher education, but they also create openings. And a growing number of entrepreneurial leaders like those on this panel are rethinking the structure and delivery of college programs, expectations about student learning, and what it takes to help more students choose well in college, persist, and succeed. This is particularly true among sectors that serve the majority of college students, community colleges, and less selective four-year public institutions, as well as online providers. Of the many challenges facing students in higher education today, I want to highlight one that is driving significant innovation. Too many college students never find their way or lose their way before they earn credentials, particularly students with limited experience of what college demands. For far too many students, as one Columbia University researcher put it, finding a path to a degree is the equivalent of navigating a shapeless river on a dark night. Students don't have the information they need about available programs, they have limited guidance, and are overwhelmed by their options. Traditional program delivery is often too rigid, but program requirements are often too flexible. The institutional and state innovations represented on this panel respond to this challenge. They help more students get the tools they need to navigate the shapeless river before they enroll and throughout college, and they give the river itself more shape. While they may seem quite different, many promising higher education learning innovations build from a handful of core design principles. These include acceleration, changes in program structure and delivery that help students move faster to earn credits and credentials, more personalized learning and support, which means more choices in how, when, and where learning occurs, coupled with active advising about options and responsibilities, clear pathways to credentials with value, meaning streamlined programs of study that guide students to successful transfer or a range of credentials in demand in the labor market, and more effective pre-college on-ramps for underprepared students, both youth and adults, that help these students get ready for and transition smoothly into college programs. You're going to hear about all of these principles in today's presentations. There are a number of reform efforts based on these principles that are demonstrating results, evidence of success, and moving towards large-scale implementation. Many states, Tennessee being one of them, North Carolina, Colorado, Connecticut, Massachusetts, are involved in dramatic redesigns of developmental education based on the evidence that long, standalone remedial sequences are an obstacle to student success. These states are changing policy, and their institutions are changing policy and practice to encourage many more underprepared students to enroll directly in college-level courses, coupled with targeted academic supports, and this model is yielding impressive early results. Many post-secondary institutions and systems are implementing and expanding career pathway programs, and you'll hear about some of that today. These simplified routes to credentials that employers value use up-to-date labor market information to help design learning programs. They contextualize remediation into college-level instruction. They move underprepared students more quickly to college learning. Several dozen states are embracing these models, drawing lessons from the pioneer of Washington's iBest program. Other states, including North Carolina with its Success NC program, are supporting college completion pathways for transfer and occupational students that combine a lot of these principles: mandatory and intensive advising, developmental education redesign, streamlined programs of study, much tighter employer engagement, and interventions to keep students on track. There are two other types of innovation described in my written testimony that I don't have time to go into detail on here. One is competency-based learning flexible online. You're going to hear a lot of that from Paul LeBlanc. And also dual enrollment and early college models for accelerating college credits in high school that are helping students save money and time on their way to a degree. I want to say that many ambitious of these higher ed reform efforts, many of these ambitious efforts use federal innovation funds to get started and expand, including Department of Labor TAC grants and Workforce Investment Fund grants, Department of Education Investing in Innovation, I3 grants, and also federal financial aid is often critical if the innovations that we're talking about for low-income students are to get to scale. So as you consider the Higher Education Act reauthorization, I encourage Congress to increase its commitment to the important role it plays as a catalyst and support for evidence-based, game-changing innovations. First, Congress should provide incentives for innovation and the expansion of evidence-based models. That can be through FIPSI, community college innovation competitions, Race to the Top, and other initiatives that provide states and institutions resources and flexibility needed to test, develop, and take successful strategies to scale. The incentives should include priority on the principles of reform discussed here today. And they could include incentives that encourage states to implement policies that support these directions. In addition, Congress should carefully remove existing barriers to these flexible approaches in current federal law and regulation on student financial aid. And finally, better alignment of requirements across higher education-related laws would make it easier to braid funding to scale some of these effective innovations, particularly those that straddle different parts of the education and training system. So I'm happy to take questions later and discussions, and thank you again for having me here.
Dr. Kerwin, welcome, and please proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. It's an honor to be here today, and it's a special privilege to be here as a proud constituent of Senator Mikulski's. I want to express my appreciation to the committee members for the important work you have done and continue to do on behalf of higher education. I'm especially pleased that you are focusing on the issue of innovation in higher education delivery. I think we are at an important moment in higher education brought about by three dynamics. First, the fiscal challenges requiring higher education to do more with less if we are to meet our obligations to the nation. Second, advances in information technology, the creation of intelligent software, and the ubiquitous nature of the Internet, which have the potential to transform our nation's college classrooms. And third, developments in cognitive science, or the learning sciences. We actually know so much more today about the kind of activities that imprint knowledge on the brain. The potential to improve teaching and learning using IT and cognitive sciences as a tool, serve more students, and bend the cost curve creates the most exciting opportunity I have experienced in my 50 years in higher education. Let me describe what we're doing in the University System of Maryland to realize this opportunity. By way of context, the University System of Maryland consists of 3 research universities, 3 historically black universities, 5 traditional so-called comprehensive universities, a specialized research institute, and the University of Maryland University College, the nation's largest not-for-profit online university. As such, we are a microcosm of higher education in America. University College is widely known for its innovative use of technology and the Internet, so my remarks today will focus on our other residential institutions. 6 or 7 years ago, we began our efforts to redesign or re-engineer our lower division educational offerings through the use of technology, online tutorials, and active learning classrooms. One of our early successes was Chemistry 101 at the University of Maryland Eastern Shore, a historically black institution. This course had a high failure rate, above 50%. With the redesign, the pass rate increased to over 70%, and we documented substantial reduction in costs for course delivery. Armed with this success, we began a systematic effort to redesign our lower division gateway courses across the system, the very courses that are the primary roadblock for many students. By the end of this year, we will have redesigned some 80 courses across the University System of Maryland, serving more than 24,000 students in any one semester. In all of these courses, we have documented improved student success and lower costs. Our approach is to actively support and encourage our faculty to engage in teaching innovation using technology, active learning classrooms, online tutorials, and constant feedback to students on their performance. However, and this is a point that Senator Alexander made, we insist that innovations must be tested and piloted to ensure that learning does actually improve and that costs are actually contained. If either does not occur, we do not let the innovation proceed. As part of our innovation agenda, we are engaged in a very important study of so-called MOOCs, massively open online courses. Most of the focus on MOOCs to date is how they might bring educational opportunities to students not enrolled in traditional higher education institutions. In partnership with the nonprofit Ithaca and Coursera, the largest MOOC producer, with funding from the Gates Foundation, we are testing whether MOOCs can be used on residential campuses to improve educational outcomes and lower costs. We have 23 pilots operating across the system to test this hypothesis. The results of this experiment will be available this June. I'll conclude my remarks by noting that we in higher education have a responsibility, an obligation really, to find lower cost means of delivering high-quality higher education. We in the University System of Maryland take this responsibility very, very seriously. As Congress begins the process of reauthorizing the Higher Education Act, I urge you to consider provisions that promote and encourage the kind of innovations I've described today. I'm also pleased to hear Senator Mikulski and Senator Alexander mention deregulation of higher education. That should be an important consideration as you proceed with the reauthorization. As I indicated at the outset of my testimony, thanks to the power of IT, the development of intelligent software, and advances in cognitive sciences, we have an opportunity at this moment that comes along only rarely in higher education. I genuinely believe that the potential now exists to use these advances, improve learning outcomes, and reduce the cost of educational delivery. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kerwin. Dr. Rawls, welcome. Please proceed.
Thank you, sir. Chairman Harkin, Ranking Member Alexander, members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to be here. And I want to acknowledge my home state senators, Senator Burr and Senator Hagan, who are such great champions of our community colleges and our North Carolina community college students. 4 years ago this month, North Carolina community college leaders met at Fayetteville Technical Community College near Fort Bragg and declared student success to be the primary strategic focus of the North Carolina community college system. And from that day forward, student success became our focus in strategic planning. It wasn't that we didn't focus on it before, it's just now it changed our culture somewhat to focus on success as much as we had focused on access, one where we note not only how many students make it through our registration lines, but more importantly, how many cross our graduation stages. So for 9 months in 2010, state community college leaders crisscrossed North Carolina, traveling nearly 14,000 miles, attending listening sessions at all 58 of our colleges. And from those, we documented 200 college-based success innovations, 75 barriers, and in turn developed a comprehensive set of 15 statewide strategies to move the dial on student success in our state. All of those are documented in detail at our planning website, successnc.org, where they're tracked as well. And so I'd like to focus my time on some overall lessons from our 4-year experience. First, we see that rather than just providing general access to college courses, we see greater value for students in early connections to structured program pathways that accelerate them towards meaningful goals. That's meant redesigning our dual enrollment programs with our public school partners so that high school students enroll free of tuition in program pathways, not just random courses, ensuring they take the right courses to degree completion, whether it be a technical degree or a bachelor's degree. Similarly, we restructured GED programs so those students simultaneously receive developmental education to become college ready while also picking up valuable technical skills for employment. Second, we learned the value of identifying and mitigating what we call momentum loss points, points where students become bogged down and too often are pulled off course in their goals towards completion. In community colleges, this typically happens in the first semester, in the first year, often in what's been referred to as developmental education, sometimes referred to as remediation courses, often the Bermuda Triangle for community college course students where too many go in but not enough come out. In North Carolina, we redesigned this entire process, first turning to our math and English faculty experts from across the state to delineate and unpack the competencies required for college readiness, and then restructure them into more modular courses, saving student time and state resources. We've also replaced faulty predictive placement exams with a statewide diagnostic test that's based on those actual competencies, and then combined with other multiple measures, we believe that'll lead to more accurate student placement. And importantly, we also work closely with our public schools to align their career and college testing, their new high school endorsements with our developmental education reforms. For years in our state, like in many states, we tested students all through high school, and then they came to us and we retested them using different measures, and we put 2/3 back into high school classes, and that just wasn't very smart. This lack of calibration of our educational measuring sticks costs a lot of state and student resources, so alignment's been a major focus for us. And a third lesson we believe this particularly important is to structure programs with meaningful educational on and off ramps. There's multiple credentials that are of value to today's college student, degrees, but also industry certifications, certificates, badges, etc. And realizing that today 2/3 of all college students are non-traditional means they frequently exit and then re-enter our higher ed systems. And many of the best programs, I think, are designed with great steps to ensure that students have meaningful credentials when they leave, but a good on-ramp when they return. This was the general theory behind one of our largest faculty-led curriculum designs in our 50-year history. We called it Code Green, borrowed from a phrase from Thomas Friedman, that restructured 80 technical programs across 5 different academic disciplines: transportation, energy, manufacturing, environment, and construction. Students in these redesigned programs were better able, through a process of stackable certification, to build on baselines of academic, workplace, technical competency, but gain valuable third-party credentials along the way, and to become multi-skilled, shift back and forth in terms of multiple competencies, which our employers value. Now, we've seen the value of a lot of these different types of innovations, particularly the collective engagement of faculty and leaders from across our state, looking at areas like measures, performance funding, how we share innovations across different institutions. That's been sparked greatly by our supporters at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. In conclusion, I'd just like to say 2 things real quickly. One, I'm very proud to be a part of America's community colleges, which now serve over half, or almost half, not quite half, of the undergraduate students in the country. But I think our community colleges are also leaders in student success and rethinking these efforts. And I would submit as evidence our recent blueprint for the future, Reclaiming the American Dream, which talks about redesigning educational experiences, reinventing institutional roles, resetting incentives to focus on student success. And I believe your work in reauthorizing the Higher Ed Act can play a major role in moving the success agenda forward. You can redesign financial aid in ways that encourage acceleration, that allow for use of summer and other important times to move students forward. That's particularly important for non-traditional students. You can help us reinvent institutional roles by looking at the measures at the federal level, which really don't fit non-traditional students. And you can look at ways of breaking down silos between education and workforce programs like the America Works Act and other types of opportunities to bridge together these silos. All of those, I think, will make a difference both in North Carolina and across the United States, and I appreciate your leadership in taking this on. Thank you.
And Mr. Hall, again, welcome. Please proceed.
Chairman Harkin, Ranking Member Alexander, and members of the committee, I have the privilege of serving as president of Austin Peay State University in Clarksville, Tennessee. Not Texas, but Tennessee, where Austin Peay is. Tennessee's fastest growing public university and one which serves many students at risk for not completing college. More than 50% of our students receive the Pell Grant, and roughly 40% are adults. Both categories of students have traditionally experienced retention and graduation rates significantly lower than other students. At Austin Peay, we're working overtime to defeat demography on behalf of our students. We know that we can't replace their motivation or their efforts, but we've discovered there are things we can do to support their success. My goal today is to summarize two of the innovations that have helped more of our students persist and graduate. I should tell you that I'm happy to serve a campus full of faculty and staff who are discontented. In Thomas Edison's terms, he said, "Discontent is the first necessity of progress. Show me a truly satisfied man and I will show you a failure." So we're happy to be discontent with current results at Austin Peay, looking for ways to help more of our students succeed. The first innovation I want to talk with you about is in the area of developmental education. One of our most pressing challenges is how to help students who arrive at college not ready for college work. More than 50% of our students fall into this category. Traditionally, such students have been required to take non-credit courses designed to get them up to speed for college-level work as a prerequisite to taking required credit-bearing courses. Students not ready for college math, for example, would be required to take one or more non-credit math courses to catch them up, and then whatever college-level math courses they needed to graduate. The success rate for that prerequisite model was abysmal. Only about 10% of our students made it through the non-credit courses and then successfully completed the college-level course. Those results were paralleled by success rates around the country. Beginning in 2007, Austin Peay replaced the traditional model with a co-curricular approach. Now, students with academic deficiencies move straight into college credit-bearing courses with additional required workshops to help them succeed. We use talented student peer mentors to lead these workshops. In mathematics, for example, these workshops include individual diagnostics to pinpoint problem areas for each student and computer exercises to help address their particular problems. The results of the new model have been astonishing. Now, better than 70% of our students who arrive unprepared for college mathematics, for example, are able to successfully complete the introductory mathematics course for their discipline and to do so within a single semester. Results for students with other deficiencies have been comparable. And instead of paying for 2 or more courses and receiving credit for only one, students pay only for the single credit-bearing course, with a modest $75 additional fee to cover the cost of the supplemental workshops. These successes have caused the National Center for Academic Transformation to include Austin Peay's co-curricular model as one of 6 recommended models for redesigning developmental courses. Similarly, Complete College America has featured Austin Peay's co-curricular design among its recommended strategies for meeting the needs of students who arrive at college unprepared for college-level work. At Austin Peay, we've also harnessed the power of technology to guide students on the path to a successful degree. Our revolutionary program, Degree Compass, created by Dr. Tristan Denley and now licensed to Desire to Learn, is a personalized, web-based course recommendation tool that uses predictive analytics to guide students' course selection in a way that not only enhances their rate of academic success, but also the timely completion of their degree. Spotlighted by publications such as the New York Times and the Wall Street Journal, and recognized by President Obama and by Bill Gates, Degree Compass is making a difference in success rates for students not only at Austin Peay, but at other universities and community college that have made it available to their students. Across multiple institutions, we're seeing the average credit hours earned by students increase in correlation to the extent they take courses recommended by Degree Compass. Furthermore, the achievement gap that tends to exist between low-income or minority students and other students is being dramatically narrowed where students build schedules using the course recommended by Degree Compass. The results of the innovations I've described at Austin Peay have been dramatic. State funding for higher education in Tennessee is now based almost 100% on institutional performance, especially as measured by the retention and graduation of our students. I'm pleased to tell you that for the first 2 years of this new funding model, Austin Peay State University has led the state in increased performance in funding. We've also seen our 6-year graduation rate increase by 25% over the past 6 years. In closing, I thank you for the opportunity to address the important subject of innovation in higher education. Now more than ever, we know that innovation in service of student success is necessary to achieve the degree completion results America needs over the next decade. The results we've seen at Austin Peay demonstrate that innovation to support student success is within our grasp. Thank you.
All. Dr. LeBlanc, welcome. Please proceed.
Thank you, Senators, for the opportunity to appear before you. As you know, Southern New Hampshire University made a little bit of education history back in April when the Department of Education approved our modestly named College for America degree program under the direct assessment of student learning provisions under Title IV. So for the first time ever, federal financial aid dollars will be paid for actual documented learning rather than seat time. CFA, as we call it for short, is the first of a new breed of competency-based education programs that are untethered to the credit hour. If you think about it, the credit hour sort of functions like the Higgs boson particle of higher education. It serves a series of functions for which it was never designed. It was designed more than 100 years ago to figure out how to pay pensions to faculty members. But if you think about it, it now defines and unitizes how we think about knowledge. It defines degree programs. It defines faculty workload. It defines how we allocate our resources, our physical resources. It permeates higher ed in a way that was never part of the plan. And it is also the basis for giving out $150 billion of federal financial aid. It's powerful oxygen that keeps our industry alive in many ways. It's very good at telling us how long people have sat, but it's not very good at telling us what they've learned. The average employer who looks at a transcript and sees a B in Intro to Sociology doesn't know much more than somebody better than somebody else with a B- or a C+. They can infer some things from the course title, but that's about it. Programs like College for America make learning fixed and allow time to be negotiable. And this is a fundamental flipping of the credit hour construct. We focus on outcomes and not inputs, and that allows for new delivery models when, well designed, can lower cost, improve quality, and graduate more Americans with better skills. In our case, College for America costs $1,250 every 6 months. Our first graduate went from 0 credits to an associate's degree in under 100 days. We have another 20 who have done it in under 9 months. Not because, well, they are in some ways extraordinary, but because they're working adults who knew a lot. A person who's worked for 20 years in a family business as a bookkeeper probably knows college math. Why would we think that making them sit through 15 weeks of a term would improve their learning? On the other hand, why would we penalize somebody who needs 1.5 years to learn how to write well? The thing that is negotiable for us is the time. What's not negotiable for us is the learning and the claims we make for our students. We work closely with large-scale employers such as ConAgra Foods, Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield, Partners Health, Cumberland Gulf, the City of Memphis, and more. Our competencies are closely aligned with their needs, and we use cutting-edge labor research tools to develop our programs. I have to tell you there's a crisis of confidence among employers who find themselves with graduates of 4-year degree programs who don't write very well. When I ask the question to CEOs and HR directors and say, raise your hand if you have somebody working for you who struggles with basic math, to navigate a budget, to work in a spreadsheet, more than half the hands in the room go up. Raise your hands if you have somebody working for you who doesn't write very well, who you'd hesitate to put in front of a group of customers or clients. More than half the hands go up. They have embraced our approach to education through competencies because that's how they think about their needs. And we're willing to declare the claims we make for the learning and to stand behind them in a way that I think is not typical. CBE programs, competency-based education programs, have the potential to drive a paradigm shift in higher education, but we need to know a lot more in order to inform the kind of policy making in which you're engaged. This is a new movement in some ways with more questions than answers. So I applaud the committee for its focus on innovation and for seeking ways to develop new, more sustainable business models for higher education. I think a word needs to be said about what kinds of innovation you seek to support. A lot of what we see in higher education is sustaining innovation, genuine improvements in quality, genuine improvements in persistence and graduation rates, but not game changers. If the game you're trying to change has to do with sustainability and access and cost. For that sort of innovative change, you need to look at business models and new ways to think about our delivery, and this is where we harness both the technology that's been described, but also the unbundling of higher ed, which is underway and makes all sorts of new models possible. Federal government can support CBE programs in the following ways. You can support experimental sites that allow for non-time-based models of aid disbursement that align with non-time-based models of educational delivery. While direct assessment allows for an alternative to time, all of the supporting existing regulatory guidelines remain tethered to the credit hour. You had the foresight to pass legislation allowing experimentation. We now need to use it and to ensure that the underlying regulations do not squelch the innovation the legislation sought to encourage. I would suggest that you need to support new accreditation pathways that develop principles of good practices in CBE, either as an option within existing regional accreditors or through a new body. Support development of agreed-upon definitions of competencies. If competencies are to replace or be an alternative to the credit hour as the currency of higher education, we need a much better exchange rate than the one that has bedeviled the credit hour and produced so much inefficiency and waste. The government should create safe spaces for institutional innovation and learn from those experiments in ways that can eventually inform policy, foster the development of more CBE programs that provide high quality, low prices, and lift the quality of the traditional time-based programs that will dominate higher education for the foreseeable future. In return, you should demand more from us as an industry. We should provide greater transparency in data than we've been willing to share. You should hold us accountable for the outcomes we produce, for how we know, for the degree to which we prepare students for the world of work, for the degree that we provide access and support for students in need. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. LeBlanc. Thank you all very much for your stimulating comments and for your excellent written testimonies. We'll begin a round of 5-minute questions here. First, both Dr. Kerwin and Mr. Kazis mentioned something about being careful of regulations and deregulation. I would just tell you that at the request of Senator Alexander, we included in our appropriations bill that I chair on that appropriations side, money in the appropriations bill for a national study on regulations and reporting requirements in higher education. I'm not certain we're going to get the appropriations bill through or not, but nonetheless. All right. Our distinguished chairwoman is going to drive that bill through. Not if we don't get it, it's not because of her. It's because of, well, I won't get into that. But anyway, but you could help us by either now or in written form what it is that you believe is stifling innovation on the federal end in higher education. What rules, what regulations are there that we have that is stifling this kind of innovation? If you have something off the top of your head right now, I'd be glad to entertain that.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I would like to provide you with a more reasoned and complete list of items, but I will mention one, and I think my colleague who just spoke referenced one, and that is competency-based credit. The current financial aid rules do not allow institutions to engage in extensively in competency-based credits. And when you think about how the world has changed, the availability of educational materials and resources, you think, just the MOOCs themselves, with all of these courses available that people can access for free and learn material, and why not have a system that would allow them to demonstrate they have that knowledge as part of their higher education experience and get credit for that learning? In some ways, it's already part of the higher education system. I think most of our institutions accept advanced place AP credits. That's competency-based credit. Mm-hmm. We allow some students to take credit by examination. That's competency-based credit. Mm-hmm. So this isn't a foreign idea to higher education. We just need to recognize it and support the kind of change that would allow institutions to become more active in this approach.
Mr. Kazis, do you have something shortly on that?
Yeah, I'll mention just a few things that These may seem small bore, but I think they're indicative, and we can go to a larger list as well. But one that was already mentioned was reinstating year-round Pell. If your goal is to accelerate, and a lot of the innovative programs use the summer, there's an issue there. How to do that well is complicated, but to reinstate year-round Pell is important. To restore the ability to benefit provisions that were eliminated in the fiscal year 12 appropriations. Those have really hurt a lot of the most innovative career pathways programs for underprepared adults by basically cutting off their eligibility to be in very effective career pathways programs into post-secondary credentials. Those are two.
In my limited time, I have one less. Dr. Rawls, others in community colleges in Iowa, we have seen community colleges reach down to high schools, 2+2 programs, that type of thing. In my experience in higher education, you go to high school, you graduate, and then you go to college, and there's a big dividing line there. And I'm wondering if there isn't more of a role for our colleges to play, especially now that we're moving towards career and college-based structures in our elementary and secondary education, so they align with college, what college needs, what career needs. To have more colleges reaching down to high schools and connecting with high schools in a way that I've seen community colleges do, but I've not seen our private colleges much do that, or our public universities do much of that. Is that something that we should be looking at? I just said to you, Dr. Rose, but I'm looking at the other ones, too.
I would say yes, and I'd also say community colleges play a unique role in that regard, because I think we're the seam in seamless education. We reach down to the high schools, but we also are that pathway to four-year colleges. So we often bridge that. One of the ways that's been seen in North Carolina is through the early college high schools. We have approximately a third of all the early college high schools in the United States on our campuses in North Carolina. And what we've seen is remarkable results. We've seen that if you have high structure, high support, but importantly high expectations, it leads to high success. About 50% last year of our early college high school students graduated with high school and their two-year associate's degree at the same time, much faster than we ever thought. And it's because, I think, of those combinations and reaching and pulling that together is what's making that work.
Private public universities to do similar kinds of things.
Senator, at Austin Peay, we actually have a partnership with our local school system where we have a high school on our campus. It's called the Middle College at Austin Peay, where students take high school courses, and then in their junior year they take one college course a semester from our curriculum, and in their senior year they take 2 college courses a semester. Those students who are on our campus for 2 years tend to wind up with at least 18 hours of college credit when they graduate from high school.
Very good. Well, I'll explore it later in my second round, but I want you to think about that idea, especially in a big system like University of Maryland system.
Right.
Senator Alexander.
Thanks, Dr. Kerwin. To pursue what Senator Harkin said, I'd just like to make a request. We, with the chairman's permission, Senator Burr and I, Senator Mikulski and Bennett, have formed a little working group to focus on deregulation of higher education. We've asked you and Chancellor Zeppos at Vanderbilt, working with the American Council on Education, to help us do that. I want to make a suggestion that's based on something we did a few years ago called the America Competes Act, when a few of us asked the National Academies to give us the 10 specific proposals in priority order that would help, that we could do to help make our nation more competitive. And they got together a very distinguished group, and they gave us 20, but they were very specific, and they were in priority order, and we've enacted 2/3 of them.
Right.
So what I would suggest to you is we don't have the capacity here to know exactly what to do about deregulation of higher education, but to the extent you and your colleagues could give to us specific proposals, just as you were doing, in priority order, you'd be surprised how many of them are likely to make their way into law. So this is a serious, it's taken us a few years to get to this point, but we've got enough horsepower on the subject within the Senate, and the time is right, that with that kind of response from the American, from colleges and universities, we'll get a result. So I just wanted to to mention that.
Thank you, Senator. It says an assignment I welcome.
Well,
Look forward to
and we're also interested in the fact we've reauthorized the Higher Education Act 8 times.
Right.
And every time we do it in a well-meaning way, we end up with new laws and a whole bunch of new regulations. We need to find ways to say, okay, let's weed the garden.
Right.
Before we do some more. And that's not an ideological difference of opinion we have here. We just need, but we need to say, what are the objectives? Now, let's get rid of this stuff and write it in plain English and limit the amount of time you're spending on all that. So we're dead serious about this, and it's a bipartisan approach, and we'd like to get a result on it.
Thank you very much.
Now, Mr. Hall, I'd like to ask you, how do you decide? I'm extremely impressed with what you've done at Austin Peay, and I think you're doing a tremendous job. Now, how do you decide who's college ready? Do you just let anybody in, or how do you know who to let in?
Senator, we use ACT score and sub-scores along with high school transcripts.
But are they prepared for college? I mean, obviously you're taking a lower definition, because beforehand you would have said you shun them off to non-credit courses. Now you say, come on in, right?
Yes. What we figured out is that we can help them to succeed in college-level credit, even if they have some deficiencies in particular areas. When I say they're not ready for college work, I'm talking about one specific area, possibly more than one, where they're not ready in very specific topics.
Oh, so generally they're ready, but they might be deficient in math, say.
That's right, Senator.
But it's a lower standard than 5 years ago or 10 years ago, right?
No, Senator, it's higher. I mean...
Oh, is it?
What we expect them to be able to do is higher today than it was 5 years ago.
Okay. But what they know when they come in is lower.
Except, as you know, in Tennessee, Tennessee's been involved in revamping its high school curriculum so that students are now arriving to us more prepared than they ever have been in the past.
Right.
So there's a sense in which I think that what we've been doing here to reformulate developmental education is more geared to what's been happening in the past. And Tennessee's now doing a better job of getting students ready for college-level work as they leave from high school.
Right. Dr. LeBlanc or Mr. Hall or any of you, how do we create a culture where there's more replication of these good ideas without making the mistake of telling you what to do and interfering with your autonomy to make your own decisions? How do we do that? Any advice about that?
I would steer you to the distinction between sustaining and disruptive innovation. And if it's sustaining innovation, I think we know how to do that. I think higher education has a pretty good track record of sharing through all of the sort of traditional ways of conferences, et cetera. If you're talking about disruptive innovation, you don't currently have an ecosystem that allows that to happen very easily. And it is everything from...
I really mean, what do we do as legislators? What should we do or not do to create an environment in which things like you're doing are more likely to succeed on other campuses?
Right. So I think you need to make more space in terms of the regulatory law that sort of gets and squelches the kind of possibilities that you made available wisely with foresight around experimental sites. So you said in legislation, we're going to allow innovation experimentation, and you didn't align the underlying regulatory law that still tethers you back to the credit hour. Navigating that, tremendously difficult. Because that hasn't changed, there's been no incentive for providers to build new systems. So if you try to find the necessary student information system out there, it doesn't exist today. The Department of Education, when we worked with them, worked very hard to make this happen, but it was a torturous process trying to make regulatory, time-based regulations serve legislation that said, no, we will welcome alternatives. So I think you need to make space in that experiment. You've done it in a sense already. You've said we'll allow experimental sites. They haven't happened around this area.
Yes. If I might, Senator, you ask a very good question. What can you do? And one thing that occurs to me is to provide some incentives to institutions to engage in innovation. I think it's a difficult time to talk about new money. So maybe it's redirected money at FIPSI or within the education division of the NSF. But there is, I believe so strongly, a moment of opportunity here where the technology has reached the point that it really can improve learning. It can lower the costs, but there needs to be, there's a startup cost for this. and some form of program of grants to provide the incentives for institutions to engage more deeply in these activities, I think could be very, very helpful, because there are examples out there of success that others can build upon.
Just to piggyback on that, many of, well, in my state of Massachusetts, a few years ago they competed for a Department of Labor TAC grant, which was to transform workforce programs within the community colleges. That's one of a lot of TAC grants, but there is no real mechanism for those TAC grant recipients to learn from each other, to learn from each other within the state. That involved all the colleges in the state, and to learn across other TAC grantees. So there's a way in which you shouldn't assume that that learning happens easily, and it may be that in legislation, carving out some, technical assistance, peer learning opportunities that get driven down to the field, so that the field has the capacity to say, this is working, let's move it over here, let's scale it up.
Senator Alexander, if I may, you're concerned about how do you replicate and expand the number of schools doing innovative work of the kinds that you've been hearing about today. I'll give you one example. We're part of a consortium of 30 institutions right now who are working on competency-based models, direct assessment models. The issues they face drill down to accreditation, which is, if you think about it as a member process, tends to strengthen the incumbent models, right? And especially if those incumbents are threatened by the new models. So we need a different pathway, whether it's through the regionals or an alternative. Not taking a position on that, but these schools will tell you that it's that sort of regulatory impediment that pulls you back into the traditional incumbent models that's getting in the way. And these are University of Wisconsin system. These are large players that are out there trying to do this work right now.
In order, I have Senator Murphy, Senator Baldwin, Senator Franken, Senator Whitehouse. Senator Murphy.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Listen, I think this is maybe the most or one of the most important hearings that we've done all year, because we today have a generation of young families that are just absolutely drowning in college debt, and I'm frankly representative of that cohort, paying for past college and desperately saving for future college. And I guess part of my frustration on today is that in hearing about all of the amazing work you're doing in terms of innovation, I maybe haven't heard enough about how this innovation is going to directly lead to college costing less for students, because ultimately quality is obviously paramount here, but we can't survive as a nation if we continue to spiral upwards over $1 trillion in student debt. And so I wanted to maybe explore that for a second, but before I do, just to add on to Senator Alexander's line of questioning on innovation, I'm so pleased that you're undertaking an effort to try to look at deregulation, and I hope that if there's room, I can help. We've got this three-legged stool of regulation, but it's pretty hard to get all of the stools aligned behind a program like competency-based learning when you've got to get the accreditors, the Title IV administrators, and the states to think outside of the box. And I think that's going to be one of the keys to unlocking some of the big steps forward. Dr. Kern, maybe let me ask you a question about affordability, because you outlined some really impressive work that you've been doing to redesign curriculum. And you talked about the fact that one of the things you're looking at is the cost to the system of delivering that course. But what has that meant in terms of the cost to the student? Because Connecticut is amongst the states that's making some big leaps forward in terms of innovation, but public school tuition has gone up by 20% in the last 5 years. So we haven't delivered a more affordable product to our students, even though we are an innovative state. What's going on in Maryland?
Well, we have a good story to tell in that regard. Since 2008, tuition in the state of Maryland to today has gone up a cumulative 8%. So we have been able to use these innovations and, quite frankly, support from our state to hold down the growth in tuition over this period of time, in part because of our innovations in the classroom and outside the classroom. We have really made a dramatic progress on tuition. We've gone from being the 7th highest tuition state in the nation to the 28th highest tuition state in the nation. Now, we've gotten a lot of help from other states, mind you, because tuition is ramped up. But our innovations have led directly to a moderation in the cost of tuition. Think about that, 8% cumulatively since 2008.
Yeah. I think that we've talked about a lot of ways to stimulate innovation. We've also talked about accountability. I think part of accountability should be affordability.
Yeah, absolutely.
And as we look to different accountability measures, maybe through the dispensation of Title IV money, affordability should be on the table. Let me, there's a million different questions on that line, but I wanted to talk to you, Mr. LeBlanc, before my time has expired about your programming, because I think you're right to suggest that we need to be doing more to really challenge some model breaking here. And you answered the question as to why more schools aren't doing what you're doing, but let me ask a specific question about competency-based learning, because I believe that it is the future, and it's frustrating to know there's only a couple schools that have gotten the authorization to do it. One of the criticisms of competency-based learning is that it could fall victim to the same criticism you had of how existing learning is done, that if the competency is essentially set by each individual school, it doesn't necessarily tell employers what degree you got if the competency is different, and there is maybe a temptation to have a race to the bottom in terms of lower competency, shorter degree times, less cost. If we move in the direction of competency-based learning, which I would love to do as a nation, because I think it's one of the ways to deliver a much more affordable product with better results and metrics, how do we make sure that we have some ability for employers to know what they're getting?
So, as I said, we're very early in this movement, and there isn't an agreed-upon understanding of what constitutes a well-designed competency rigor level. So, for all my criticisms of the credit hour, if you remove the time piece of that, as ill-defined as the credit hour is as a unit of learning, we all sort of know it when we see it. Most of us who have worked in academia could look at a course and say, this feels like a 3-credit-hour course. We don't have that equivalent ability right now in competency-based education. So the work that's going on around the consortium I mentioned and others is really an attempt to try to get some common agreed-upon definitions. And this is where experimental sites could inform eventual policy making, to use the work of people who are doing this today in the trenches to say, what are you learning and how are you coming to agree upon? The one thing I will say about those 30 institutions, they're bound and determined not to replicate the irrationality of our current transfer credit system, which counts, according to people like Jane Wellman, in enormous amounts of waste in the higher ed system right now. So it's a work in progress, and we're very early on, and that's why we need that space, the safe space, to sort of figure that out. That's the critical piece.
Murphy. Senator Baldwin.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I do want to thank you and our ranking member for holding this hearing. It's been very, very helpful. In my travels around the state of Wisconsin, I have visited with a lot of universities and technical college and been heartened to see how much innovation is specifically happening to support non-traditional students. And by that I mean older students and returning adult students, those who might be seeking a specific occupational certificate or something like that. This population does have unique particular needs, and I've met some really inspiring figures who are juggling full-time work, raising families, and still returning to school. It is an amazing commitment they're making to work towards a certificate or a degree that will give them the tools they need to get a higher quality job. So I'm interested in hearing from the panel about thoughts on how current innovations in higher education are meeting the needs of this particular group of students. And before I turn it over for all of you to comment, I did hear you, Mr. LeBlanc, talk about the innovation at the University of Wisconsin system. They're preparing next month to launch a new program called UW Flex. and it is especially focused on returning students that I'm describing, but also based entirely on competencies. The foundation of this program is a movement to competency-based programming. But I also recognize that this focus is still in its infancy, but it has a real great potential to serve non-traditional students. So perhaps we'll start with you, Mr. LeBlanc, but I'd love to hear innovation as focused on this particular group of students.
So it will happen there first, and I think sometimes what clouds our policy discussions is that we don't fully recognize the very different student markets that we serve. So when Senator Murphy talks about student loan and people's worries about their 9, 10, and 12-year-olds going off to college someday, that's a particularly expensive model of higher education, and it's the one that seems least sustainable right now. Because it's about education, obviously, but more fully it's about a coming-of-age experience, and that's a very expensive thing to offer, and technology doesn't help very much. So I think in the future we will see an unbundling of the coming-of-age from the academic experience, and then we'll start to see interesting models when that happens. We've had a 3-year degree program for 15 years with the help of FIPSE, and that shaves 25% off the cost of education. Increasingly, sending your kid off to a campus for 4 years is a pretty expensive way of coming of age. But the greatest, the largest percentage of students in America today are non-traditional or post-traditional students, adults who you described so aptly, Senator Ballmer, as going back and juggling family and work and education. And what we found for all of our use of technology, online, really strong data analytics, we do 24/7 monitoring of every student, every class in ways that we just can't replicate in a traditional delivery model. My experience has been a reaffirmation of fundamental human factors, and probably the most important relationship with those adult learners is our advisors who have a caseload and who are dedicated to their particular students. And for those learners, it's not about intellectual capability, it's about the fact they haven't written a paper in 12 years. That maybe they had mixed academic success. And now what they need more than anything is kind of psycho-emotional support than academic support. And some of that is academic support, and some of that's making sure that they're in the right prerequisite course, and some of that's steering them to tutorial services when they're writing that first paper. But I can tell you by listening in on calls that 90% of the time it's about believing you can do it.
Thank you. Mr. Kiss.
The issue you raised is critically important. In Wisconsin, actually, your technical college systems are doing a lot of creative work. But a couple of issues relating to kind of the needs of this population. As you said, they need to move very quickly to credentials that matter in the labor market. And so one question is, how do you get the employers really invested in the programs? How do you use up-to-date labor market information to basically create programs that are streamlined, targeted to the needs of the employers in the community? This is something that Dr. Rawls was talking about in North Carolina. This career pathway strategy is something that many states are engaging in. But critical is, where are the employers? How do you make sure that they're getting what they need out of these programs, so that people who don't have a lot of time aren't taking courses and taking programs that don't lead them anywhere?
Very quickly, we have within the university system of Maryland an institution whose total focus is on the working adult, the University of Maryland University College. It's totally online. They live and breathe innovation, and they target the working adult. So, for example, they're now developing course materials that are online course materials, so students don't have to buy textbooks. They develop degree programs in consultation with industry leaders, so that students who graduate from a university college know they have their credentials to move right into the workplace. They have a partnership with every community college in the state, and that they can guarantee a student that if you complete your degree at the community college, you can complete your degree at university college without any increased tuition. So they are, as I say, very focused on serving the population you're talking about.
Dr. Rawls?
Well, with community colleges, non-traditional students are us, and they now account for 2/3 of all college students in the U.S. So we have to figure out how to maximize their short amount of time. That's technology. One-third of all our courses are offered online. Fastest growth area, hybrid areas. That's how we structure programs, stackable certification models, where students don't have to repeat general educations, but they can build on that with different competencies. And then how we articulate, for instance, with universities, make sure our articulation agreements are so tight that they don't repeat English and math. And that's something that we're working towards. Something that you can do as well is understanding that non-traditional students don't look to take summer vacations. So issues around Pell Grants and other things that are built on a traditional model don't fit them. And so how we maximize their time is very, very important to help them get the credentials they want, which is primarily to get into the workplace.
Senator, navigating the pathway towards a degree is one of the biggest challenges for our students, and there are several things cutting against their success. One of them is there's some students who kind of wander around a little bit, and they take more courses than they need to because they're not going straight forward to a degree. In Tennessee, our students take about 20% more courses than they need to take for a degree. And the longer they take along the pathway, especially for non-traditional students, low-income students, the more likely it is that life throws them off path, sends them away, gets them off track. That's why the program we're using, Degree Compass, developed by Dr. Tristan Denley, is so important. We've calculated across universities the difference in achievement for low-income students, minority students, and other students. And we're seeing the gap that normally exists without that program. When we start using that program and students take the recommendations of this very sophisticated program, we're seeing that gap narrowing almost to nothing. And I think it's because when students are getting solid advice from their faculty members and supported by this program, they're able to stick to a path and get toward a degree more quickly. And that is crucial for low-income and adult students.
Thank you.
Senator Baldwin. And now it's Senator Franken.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for calling this tremendously important hearing. Most of you, if not all of you, in your testimony and just now in response to Senator Baldwin, speak to a problem that affects so many businesses in Minnesota and around the country, which is the skills gap. We have so many businesses that have jobs that are open that they need to fill that they can't fill because they can't find the employees with the skills. Mr. Kazis, you discuss helping students advance more quickly and efficiently in what you call structured career pathways tied to high-demand industry sector. And you call for, quote, providing incentives for employers and institutions to partner in the development and delivery of career pathways for students. Dr. Rawls, you focus especially on community and technical colleges. You talk about how important it is for educational institutions to structure programs with meaningful educational off-ramps so students can leave school with something really meaningful for them and their careers. And you talk about redesigning courses so that students have the competencies needed for tomorrow's workplaces. And the point here is to provide stronger linkages between educational and workforce programs. Dr. LeBlanc, in your testimony, you talk about the competency-based programs you had and how important it is to work closely with businesses to help educate students in the skills they need to fill jobs at those businesses. I could not agree more with all of you. I have legislation, the Community College to Career Act Fund, which would incentivize partnerships between employers and two-year community and technical colleges to rapidly train workers and students for those skilled jobs. That sounds like exactly what you're talking about. What kind of help can we give on the federal level to promote that, to incentivize that, these partnerships between business and especially the two-year community and technical colleges?
Senator, if I may, employer engagement is absolutely key here. At each of our colleges, we have employer advisory committees for each program, but There's also, I think, a new opportunity here, and that's the growth of a new type of competencies, industry-defined competencies, industry credentials, the type of work that the National Association of Manufacturers Manufacturing Institute is doing. That gives us targets that are set by industry, and then what we can do is build those into our traditional academic programs. And so that's what the stackable certification, what you can do around that is help us figure out how to measure those. If I could tell you a quick story. When we were doing our listening tour, went to Tri-County Community College in the mountains, welding instructor came to me and said, I know you're looking at all our completion rates. And he said, if you looked at mine, we have a less than 10% completion rate, and I need to give you another bit of evidence. And he put pay stubs for all those, his students on the table, and he pointed out they're all getting welding certifications from industry through our process, but they're non-completers. Sometimes we have to figure out how to count those students who are getting those valuable credentials in our overall fabric of what we mean by college completion.
But if you get people working while they're studying, boy, that speaks to college affordability, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah, just to reiterate what Scott was saying, on this issue of metrics and performance metrics and knowing actually that or building into accountability systems not just completion but what happens after. How are they doing in the labor market? I think those issues they're tricky. The data isn't that good yet, but I think working on that and figuring out how to bring that into accountability discussions, both at the state level, it's already beginning to happen, but at the federal level, I think is also important.
Anyone else?
I think the part you can't address very well is that part of the problem, in my view, is that the incumbent systems within higher education don't allow for that kind of rapid responsiveness. Typical curriculum committee process, university governance processes go very, very slowly. And a lot of experts would say that the lifespan of a job today is about 3 to 3.5 years before jobs are either fundamentally redefined or move forward. So there's this lag period that plagues higher education. My colleagues in North Carolina, for example, sound like we have sort of addressed that very, very energetically. But we've got to sort of rethink how we sort of work within our own systems to be responsive to the kind of calls that you're putting forward.
Well, I've seen a lot of successful partnerships in Minnesota between businesses and community and technical colleges, and that's something that I think does a number of things, and I'm run out of time, but it speaks to okay. Was that sarcastic, Senator? Oh, okay. Anyway, because I'm almost always sarcastic. Anyway. No, I mean, it speaks to a number of things. College affordability, if you can train up people in credentials, stacking credentials, and get them to work, and then they're working, and then continue their education while they're working, you have very often business paying and gladly paying for their employees to get further education. And that speaks very much to college affordability. Also, this just helps the businesses in Minnesota, but there's estimated 3.5 million jobs that are available right now if people just had the skills. And this speaks also to our competitiveness globally. If we can have those workers working and have our businesses have those workers, it puts us on a much more competitive playing field, especially when manufacturing is now moving back to the United States, moving to Europe, and moving elsewhere back from places where there used to be very, very low salaries and where manufacturing used to be much, much less capital intensive. I'm sorry to have gone over, Mr. Chairman.
I, for one, found it very instructive. Gentlemen, I come to this question without a great deal of expertise. I spent considerable time as a prosecutor, but in a variety of areas of government, I have bumped into the education oversight establishment. And as time has gone by, I have become increasingly concerned that the gateway to education reform is actually education oversight reform, both at the higher education level and at the elementary and secondary education level. I'm concerned about how much value education oversight actually adds these days, given the changes that are happening in our population and in our technology. And I'd like your thoughts, and we don't have a lot of time, and I know I'm opening up a huge set of issues. So, what I'd like to do is to ask you, if you would, for the record, to take a moment when this is done and write down and send to me what your thoughts are on the ways in which government's education oversight should be changed to better allow for the type of innovation that is needed, to become more current and less obsolete, and to avoid some of the hazards that we have seen of, for instance, gigantic hedge funds coming in and kind of shooting under the regulatory system by buying a nearly defunct college's license and then turning it into a massive diploma mill that has cranked out what appear to be an awful lot of worthless diplomas. And that's a very significant tragedy in this context, because people don't get a second youth to go back and redo an education that was a phony one. So, you know, we talk a lot about education reform. I'm just becoming increasingly concerned that we can't get to that until we get our education oversight mechanisms reformed. And I'm increasingly concerned that both at the local and state and federal level, education oversight is increasingly adding little value and creates very significant burdens. So if you have responses to that immediately, I'd be delighted to hear them. If not, I'd ask you to try to think about it a little bit and send me your own thoughts, or if you think there have been particularly good work done on this that you could refer me to, I'd love to have the referrals to those articles or commentaries. Dr. Kerwin, you
Yes, Senator, when you say education oversight, are you thinking, at least in part, about the accreditation process in the United States? And,
yep.
And I share your sense that it does need to be reformed. I think we need it, because there needs to be some validation about the quality of the institutions and the degree.
Yeah, I don't think that the solution is to eliminate
exactly,
it at all.
But it does need
but
to be.
I think we're kind of driving a Model T in some respects.
Well, I think we have a system that was created in a different era, and it doesn't recognize the new realities about how students go to college, the way they can gain education. So I absolutely agree with you that there needs to be reform in the accreditation process. Let me mention one example of an oversight, a metric that is hopelessly out of date. We always look at graduation rates by measuring the time it takes an entering freshman student at an institution to complete the degree. So we look at a 6-year period of time. My understanding is that 60% of the students at an institution across the country at any given one time didn't enter that institution as a freshman. So we're measuring by the IPED's data for graduation rates a very small fraction of the students in higher education, and we're using that metric to make big decisions about the quality of an institution. So that would be one example of an oversight metric that is hopelessly out of date with the realities of today.
Yeah, particularly if you consider a woman with a couple of children who has been in a just minimum wage job and has worked terrifically hard to improve her abilities, who has taken community college courses, has suffered all of the burdens on her that additional commitment of time and effort entails with kids and a job to maintain through all of that. I mean, it's a pretty heroic act. And she gets maybe 2/3 of the way through, and then the job comes that she'd hoped for. And she's in a medical office, you know, processing, billing, and is being paid 2 or 3 times as much. And so she's done. She doesn't need to continue her education. And she walks away from that experience with the community college saying, this was a real success for me. And there's no way that our system, I think, picks up her story. Her story is an important one. Thank you very much. I yield the time.
Senator Warren, if you are ready.
I'm almost here.
Okay.
Thank you, Senator Harkin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for putting together this hearing. And with student debt more than $1.2 trillion in college tuition out of reach for so many families, colleges have to find ways to serve students better at lower costs. And student success is obviously a serious part of the student debt problem. We have good reason to suspect that students who are struggling to repay and are defaulting on their loans are those who made it to college, who borrowed money for a year or two of college and then weren't able to complete, dropped out, they got the debt but not the degree. And so I'm interested in the new practices that you're talking about here and how they may help those students. So, Dr. Kirwan, what I'd like to start with is what kind of research or evidence were your universities able to collect on your course redesigns before you put them into practice? And then I'm going to ask Mr. LeBlanc about the College for America.
Yes. You asked me specifically about the course redesign. Yes. What we do is when a redesign proposal comes in, we require that it be piloted and it be measured against the traditional way of teaching that course.
And how do you measure that?
Okay. So the measurement is usually by having the students take the same final examination. So we have a traditionally taught course and a piloted redesign course, and that are side by side, and then the students take the same final examination, and that is a typical metric to see if learning actually improves.
And so you test this multiple times before you use a new one, or you just try it?
Well, it has to be validated through this pilot, and yes, the pilot runs one time. And if there's demonstration that learning has improved and costs have not increased, hopefully lowered, then we implement the redesign on a broad scale basis.
And then can I ask, do you continue to test after that?
We test all of our courses.
No, I know you test them all, but I mean doing the comparative testing about the different approaches, or does this become a complete substitute?
This becomes a complete substitute.
So you have no basis against it?
We think we have evidence that this works, and so we then implement it as the way that course is taught across the board.
And Dr. LeBlanc?
The question is, how do we test?
So I was curious about how you tested for the changes, tested in advance, because that's one of the questions, how we determine in advance before we make these shifts that we believe they will have some outcome, or if we can't do it in advance, how we test it afterwards, rather than just we think we have a good idea.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we did a lot of pilot testing before we devised our went forward in the launch of College for America. But because it was a fundamentally different model, there wasn't a sort of control group against which we could weigh this piece, right? So I think when you're doing this kind of breakthrough work, you have to have safe space and tolerance for mistake making, which I think is absent in our regulatory environment. So our financial aid people live in fear that we'll get some regulatory piece of this wrong. And as a result, there's less desire and willingness to push definitions and boundaries and explore other ways of thinking about this. I'll give you one example. We would have preferred with this model to do a pay-for-performance financial aid model. You spend a lot of money on failure. And what we were saying is pay for competencies and pay for them along the way, but don't pay for failure. We can't do that. Your current regulations force us to give financial aid at the time of registration. We would like to exercise more professional judgment on determining the total cost of attendance. Our total cost of attendance was driven up in our conversations with the department because they followed the regulations, not because they were doing anything untoward. That's where I think there is fundamental ways of rethinking and giving some space to try this, and you're not going to have the data till you try it.
And I think that's a very valuable point, and one of the things I hope we will pursue is how the regulations can be adjusted, not just to permit more innovation, but more accountability around that innovation in ways that work for the university. Can I just ask one more quick question before we run out of time here? Because I'd love to talk about all of this for a very long time. But I wanted to ask you a question, Dr. LeBlanc. I understand that over the last 10 years, Southern New Hampshire University has been engaged in another very innovative project with the online university presence. And as I understand it, because you haven't been shy about this business model that you've done, that the presence has produced about, according to Bloomberg, in 2011, a 41% profit margin. That is, if I understand this correctly, the revenues from the students online exceeded the costs of providing that, according to Bloomberg at least, by about 41%. And then in 2013, they estimate it's about a 22% profit from this. And, you know, those are pretty impressive numbers. Those are numbers that would make Goldman Sachs envious. So the question I have about this is that practices like online education that drastically lower the costs of providing educational services by standardizing the curricula and making it accessible because you use adjunct faculty, making it accessible more cheaply. The question is, are those savings being passed along to the students? So if you're getting a 41% profit margin, it sounds like the lower costs of an online education are not being passed on to those students. Can you explain that?
Let me first correct the record, because and there's no reason you would have looked at my campus blog, but we took pains to correct John's inaccuracies in describing it. So the margins for the online portion only of our institution run in the 20 percentile range. So that part is accurate, sort of secondary, but not the 40. That would be an exorbitant.
Okay, but 22% is still pretty impressive.
So the way we think about that, there's something fundamentally different about being a not-for-profit, because we take those surpluses and plow them right back into the institution. And we plow them back into the fact that we haven't in online had a tuition increase in 3 years. We've increased financial aid and a cross-subsidy to our traditional age students in that much more expensive model. We've been able to increase persistence rates by adding many, many more advisors and academics, right? So the places where we put the money, fair question, but is it, you know, how are we using that surplus? And your fundamental question, which is, does it go back into helping students? I would say yes, in myriad ways.
Although I do have to say, and I'll quit because I know I'm over time, but the question about cross-subsidization, that in effect you're following two business models simultaneously, the students who educate on campus and the students who educate online, and that you make a 22% profit on the online students so that you can build better facilities, do other things for the on-campus.
And do things, a lot of things for the online students. So if you take a look at the investments we've made in academics and advising, if you take a look at the impact that's had on graduation.
Although I'd have to push back there, that should be accounted and reduce the 22%. I presume that 22% is net of all the costs, meaning the investments that have been made in the online student.
No, but the investments trail into
Otherwise,
the next
you're not
year,
getting
right?
a
Those surpluses get put to work in the very next year as we continue to make improvements in the program. Fundamentally, we're comfortable with the notion that Harvard Business School helps underwrite the Divinity School. Right? We take a look at the totality of our student body and say, if our online program produces surpluses and we can plow that back into various areas of the university, including online, including the traditional campus, we're comfortable with that notion. Wow. And the reality is, someone can come into our undergraduate online program and earn a bachelor's degree for under $40,000.
Wow.
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Well, you know, I really appreciate your bringing this up, because what's been bothering me all along in listening to this and competency-based learning online is that it looks like we're almost separating things out here. The poorer kids and the kids that are struggling and that can't afford to go and get the kind of socialization and and stuff that you would get by being a student, by being in a campus-based program, they then pay money for online courses. You make a profit from them that is 20-some% or whatever, and then that is put into the traditional-based campuses so that the students that are more affluent, who are able to go to a campus and be on a campus, then are aided and abetted by the profits made from the lower income students who can't have that experience.
I'm sorry, Senator.
That kind of bothers me.
You're conflating the models, so let me just, for the sake of accurate information, 90% of the kids on the traditional campus are getting financial aid. I'd have to look at Pell Grant eligibility, but it's probably almost 40% of our students on the undergraduate campus are Pell Grant eligible. So we serve working class kids, first generation kids who need a tremendous amount of financial aid to be there. They're not the same student body. So the students in our online program are overwhelmingly adults who are 40 years old. They don't seek to live on a campus. They have all the coming of age they can handle. They're juggling family and work. Two different student populations.
Okay.
So my commitment is if I can give them a very affordable education, we are well priced below the for-profit sector, for example, where sometimes people like to compare us. We're well priced below many of our online competitors in the not-for-profit sector. I'm pretty comfortable with where we are in terms of price. If the surplus that gets generated there because of our efficiencies and everything else we do in that area helps underwrite other poor kids in other parts of the institution, I can live with that. We look at the totality of our mission, and that's the beauty of being in a for-profit. We're not reporting, we're not paying dividends. There are no shareholders.
Is there any evidence that that is what is happening?
Yeah, it stands in the data. I'd be happy to follow up and share that with you. I can give you profiles of the student bodies, and I can give you economic profiles as well.
Can I just add to this then? Because your analogy is an interesting analogy here. If we think of an online education as the equivalent of the Harvard Business School, and therefore there to subsidize the Definity School, that's a little different understanding of what online education accomplishes and gives us, I think, a little different perspective on how we may want to think about online education. If it's being used to reduce the cost for students who otherwise don't have access, and everything is driven toward how to get that cost down so that they can get an education at the lowest possible cost, that's not the model you're describing. You described it, I think the words used were cross-subsidization.
Yep.
And so I think this raises some other far more profound issues about online education and in general about when we innovate, where the accountability is in innovation for what goals it's trying to accomplish and whether it's achieving those goals.
So if the goal you would put before me is, can you make an affordable education available to adults who can't get to a campus, my answer is emphatically yes. And if your question is, shouldn't you be passing that more of that $20 million surplus back in some fashion, I would say we put in lots of investments, and it includes our College for America program. So part of that 20 this year sits in a reserve and now funds the $3 to $4 million loss we'll have as we try to work through College for America, get it up to sort of operating size, et cetera. Those are the ways we use the money, and that's an incredibly low-cost model that targets the bottom 10% of wage earners in the organizations with whom we work. I think that's a very good use of the money. I've got people graduating from that program now who make $22,000 and not making family-sustaining wages. That program doesn't happen if I don't have the resources over here. We're not coming to the federal government for that R&D money. We're actually providing it ourselves.
No,
I think that's a reasonable proposition.
When you say you're providing it yourselves, no, your online students are providing it. And the question is, who are those people who are cross-subsidizing the other parts of the educational undertaking? And I just think that's an appropriate question for us to inquire into.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Fair enough.
Thank you. Very, very interesting. Do you have any follow-ups at all, Senator Franken?
I do. I'm going to leave this area and I think it's a very interesting area to talk about. But I want to talk about, you're talking about, we've been talking a lot about non-traditional students who are entering school as adults, et cetera. I want to talk about more traditional students for a second. people who come to college after high school. And Mr. Kazis, is Kazis or Kazis?
Kazis.
Kazis.
Yes.
As your testimony suggests, dual enrollment in early college, high school programs are win-win for students. They prepare students better for college by providing them with what you call a college-going culture. This is students who can go to a junior college and take a course. They speed up college completion by allowing students to earn college credit while still in high school, and they're also and therefore they're great for reining in the cost of college. When you get up to 2 years of college credits, that's 2 years of college you don't have to pay for if you get them in high school. In Minnesota, I visited a number of programs. One was at Irondale High School that gives students the opportunity to earn a 2-year associate's degree while they're in high school. The partnership the school has with Anoka Ramsey Community College, and it targets students that may come in with all the preparation necessary to succeed in post-secondary programs and helps them get on a course to completion. I have a bill to support students in getting different kinds of accreditation or getting in accelerated learning programs, which is called the Accelerated Learning Act. I'm putting a plug in for my piece of legislation, but it helps expand access to AP, to IB, to dual enrollment, and early college programs. Can you, Mr. Kazis, talk a little bit more about the evidence we have on the role accelerated learning models can and do play in preparing students for college, increasing completion rates, and reducing college costs?
Yeah, I mean, we thank you and we appreciate your effort in this area and your interest and leadership. There's been, for the past 10 years, this model of early colleges and kind of dual enrollment strategies has been developing, partly initially with foundation funding, but now more broadly. And the results from early colleges, from over 200 around the country, really sophisticated research has found that 23% of these are students who are, underprepared. They're a couple of years back when they start high school. They are generally low income, first generation college. They will be first generation college going. And in recent research, 23% of these students get enough credits for an associate's degree by the time they finish high school. 94% get some credits, averaging about 36 credits by the time they leave high school, to either a 2-year program or a 4-year program. So the potential for saving time and money for students who are low income is great. And I think it fits in, as you were talking about, with AP, IB, dual enrollment and early college are all of a piece of building that momentum to college. And it should have cost implications over time for students and families.
And isn't it true that the record of students, for example, that take an AP course and get a 3 or above, the likelihood that they will go to college and that they will complete college has been proven to be much greater.
Yeah, and same with dual enrollment programs in general, that the college entry, persistence, those numbers are much greater than for their peers who would not be in a dual enrollment program. It makes sense.
I'm a huge fan of early college, and I'm very pleased that you're introducing this bill. I think many of us have observed that for a lot of high school students, the senior year is sort of a wasted experience. They've met all their requirements, so they have, to a certain extent, time on their hands. So bringing in college courses and through partnership with community colleges or 4-year institutions at the high school can be a huge boost in accelerating college participation and decreasing time to degree. So I think this is a very good step for us to be taking.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman. My time is
recognize Senator Warren, but we have a vote coming up here in just a minute.
We have a vote, so I'll be quick, and I'll just be really quick on this. I just want to focus for a minute. There's been a lot of talk about how deregulation could encourage more innovation, give you more opportunities to meet the needs of our young people and our people who are trying to get a college education and pay for that college education. But if I could, I'd just like you to think, and we can do more of this as questions for the record because I know we need to go, is to focus slightly differently. What could the Department of Education do differently? It's one thing to talk about deregulation here, but we also have oversight over the Department of Education. And so if there are things you could mention about that, and if you have something, I'd like to start with you, Mr. Casey, since you are from the home of the World Series champions, Boston Red Sox. I just wanted to work that in very subtly, Mr. Chairman.
Well, you know, many of the kinds of innovations we've been talking about today, the Department of Education can, through its competitive grants and, you know, grant programs, its rules and regulations can help shape and can help encourage. I'd be happy to, you know, put together some documentation on this, you know, from our perspective, given the
That would be terrific. And why don't I do that? Why don't I just ask that as a question for the record? Because I think both of those are important. What is it that we could do as we are working through our current bill, but also what could the Department of Education do now to make things a little better?
And your point about innovation and accountability, and, you know, is a theme through the whole panel, but it's the one thing we have to grapple with, and the department has, you know, ability there too.
Yes, thank you.
In my opening statement, I said something about innovation for innovation's sake does not impress me.
Absolutely.
Michael Crow, the head of Arizona State University, cited studies, and I always think about this. If you are a high-income, low-performing student, C, you have an 80% chance of graduating from a four-year college. If you're a low-income, high-performing student, A and B, you have a 17% chance of graduating from college. What I want to know is how is innovation going to change that? Or is innovation simply enhancing that kind of disparity? How is innovation going to help low-income, high-performance students get to that 80% mark? They can do it. They obviously know. They're bright. But the system's rigged against them.
Right. It absolutely is.
It's just rigged against them. So I want to know, in all your thinking about innovation, how you change that. Because if you don't, what good is innovation? We're simply plowing that same ground. We're simply keeping the same system going, and we're probably making it a little bit better for both, but we keep that separation. How does innovation change that? So I'll say that for the record, too, and if you have some thoughts on that, I would be glad to, I'm more than happy to have that input. Dr. Kerr.
Well, innovation, given all the development with technology and cognitive science, gives us a real chance to have higher quality education at a lower cost. And lower cost will address that, the group you're talking about. And I'm glad you mentioned this the underrepresentation of low-income students, because I think that's one of the greatest long-term problems facing our country. Given the importance of higher education in terms of lifetime earnings and quality of life, if we don't make it possible for more low-income students to go to college, we will no longer have the American dream in our nation.
Again, I agree. Yeah, how do we have, what does innovation do?
It helps us, it's going to help us reduce the cost and make it more affordable.
Well, I have to see that.
Okay.
Or is, well, I have to see how that works. And how, again, what do we do to enhance that? What do we do to encourage innovation that addresses that disparity and helps low-income, high-performing students access college and graduate from college? To me, again, that's been the whole federal involvement in education from the land-grant colleges on, was how do we get out to people who don't have a lot to get them education? That's at Title I, elementary and secondary education. It's everything we do to try to break that down. But we've done it. I don't say we've failed miserably at it. No, we've done a lot of good in our country in educating low-income students in America. I think we can be rightfully proud of that. But who was it that said earlier that if you're satisfied, you're not making progress?
Right, exactly.
Thomas said, if you're satisfied, you're not, well, we can't just say, well, it's okay. We've done reasonably good at that. I just don't think that's going to suit us well for the future. And we have to be dissatisfied with some of the situations that are out there and get the innovation. Competency-based learning. I have a lot of questions about competency-based learning that I want to get into. How do you transfer credits and all that, which we got to figure out. If you're competency-based, you're going someplace else, how do those transfer? I didn't even get into that, but I wanted to.
Welcome the conversation, Senator.
But I welcome your input further on that and how we figure that one out, too. Well, I thought this was very stimulating. Listening to the questions, the answers, the involvement, I thought very stimulating. And again, I'll keep the record open for 10 days for further questions and from other senators who may not have been able to be here this morning because of other committee meetings. And I invite all of you, as we progress on this later this year and into next year, to continue to give us your thoughts and suggestions to our staff. And I hope that we can use our staff to reach out to you as we move along with further questions, that type of thing, so we get a good higher education reauthorization bill through. There is a vote, but anybody got one last thing they wanted to make for the record before we leave? Thank you all very much. Appreciate your leadership. Committee will stand adjourned.
Good to be with you.
A pleasure. We'll do it again sometime.
Nice to be with you.
See you again.
Glad to know that you had this relationship.
Yeah. I want to what you do. Appreciate what University of Maryland did for me. Wouldn't be where I'm right now.
Excuse me.